I'm Judge Drolet from AEA. I'm going to be one of the speakers, but I'm also going to be moderating the session. Also, one of our speakers, Jim Hollinsworth from Arctic Village, wasn't able to attend, and we have Connie Fredenberg filling in, discussing some of the same topics he would have discussed. I work for AEA, and I manage the community assistance and regional planning programs. And as part of our community assistance program, we work closely with the PCE program, which is one of the major points of contact that many of the smaller communities have with AEA. It's one of the programs that is most widely accessed by rural communities. So I'll be giving a brief overview of AEA's role in the power cost equalization program and some of the issues about how it relates to some of our other programs that come up as questions from time to time. We'll have Clair Knutsen-Lata from the Regulatory Commission of Alaska talking about the RCA role in PCE. And then we've got Connie Fredenberg, who is an independent consultant, I believe, who has worked with several communities that have been inactive in PCE to get them back on. She's also worked with some communities to do their PCE reporting, and she'll be able to talk a little bit about the process of getting back on for inactive communities with some of the ones that she's worked with recently. Okay, so I'm going to start with the AEA perspective here, and first, just a brief overview of the program. PCE is a state of Alaska program to provide support to areas of the state with extremely high energy costs. We often say that electricity costs can be 3 to 5 times what the cost is in urban Alaska, in Anchorage and Fairbanks and Juneau. It can actually be quite a bit higher than that. It can get well over $1 per kilowatt hour in some communities. This was established in 1984, 1985, around the same time that the state was funding some large infrastructure projects that supported some of the more urban, more populated parts of the state. And the PCE program was an attempt to bring some of the benefits of that state investment to other areas of the state as well. And the purpose is to bring electric rates down to equal or close to the average of rates in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. Generally, that means about 95% of the utility cost per kilowatt hour above that average rate in the urban areas is covered, although there are some complications. That's not always exactly what it ends up being. So yeah, basically the purpose of PCE is to provide that essential support in these small communities with very high energy costs on the electric side. Now we know that in Alaska in general, heating costs tend to be a much larger part of overall household energy expenditures than electricity. It can be in the area of 80 to 90% of a household's expenses are on heat rather than electricity. However, electricity is in some ways an easier type of energy to measure and an easier type of energy to support through programs like this. We have better records, we know more about the costs, and part of that's due to the role of the Regulatory Commission. So that's what the PCE program addresses, the electricity side. It's created at a time that the state was investing a lot of money, especially in large hydro projects for some of the urban or more urbanized areas of the state, Southeast Alaska, the Valdez and Kodiak areas, what's known as the four-dam pool communities that benefit from state-supported hydro. The PCE program was, as I said, an attempt to bring some of the benefits of state investment to other parts of the state as well. So this is a map of the participating communities. As of fiscal year 13, there were 190 communities. We've actually gone up by a couple more since then. About 81,000 people, and as you can see from this graphic, this map here, they're spread throughout all the state except for the rail belt. Basically, almost all of the smaller communities in rural Alaska are eligible for PCE. and almost all of those are actually receiving PCE benefits. There are still a few that are eligible but inactive, and we are working closely with them to try to get them back on so they can benefit from the program. So Alaska Energy Authority, we're a public corporation of the state of Alaska. Our mission is to reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. We have many different programs that we use to try to meet that goal. Energy planning and policy, and this is one of the areas I work in a lot, is our regional energy planning, some of our new planning efforts that we've recently been given by the legislature, and investing in energy infrastructure, which we have done a lot of in constructing some large projects, also smaller projects in some of the smaller communities, our rural power system upgrades, our bulk fuel upgrades, as well as larger projects on the rail belt, such as the Susitna-Watana Dam. Diversifying Alaska's energy portfolios through some of our programs, such as the Renewable Energy Fund, which has been a major focus of a lot of our efforts in the past few years, to support some new types of energy, reducing costs through that mechanism. We provide technical training and assistance. We have a training program in collaboration with Avtech and Seward that we use to train bulk fuel and power plant operators, and that's free to the rural utilities that take advantage of that. That's also been a major way we've tried to address the high costs of energy in Alaska, which can be driven by some operational issues as well as fuel and infrastructure and things like that. And then power cost equalization, which is one of the most direct ways that we reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. Now, one thing I want to mention here is a recent change at AEA. We've had a bit of a reorganization of some of our programs and departments. The idea behind this is kind of to streamline some of the program and project development and implementation stages, and not have those teams separated out by the types of technologies they work on or the types of areas of the state they work in, but more by their role in the project development and implementation process. That doesn't really affect PCE that much per se. However, it's also involved creating a new policy and outreach group, drawing from some of the other existing areas at AEA. And one of the most recent aspects of that change was that the PCE program was brought into that policy and outreach group. There are a lot of policy issues that PCE touches on, and as well as the PCE program being one of the main points of contact for especially the smaller rural communities with AEA. We want to emphasize that by the placement of PCE within our structure. Before that, it was under our finance department, which is certainly a major aspect of PCE, but there's a lot more to it than that finance and accounting function. So in the administration of PCE, and Claire will go a bit more into some of the duties that the RCA has, but basically AEA's role is to authorize payment to utilities, determine eligibility of customers. Residential and community facility customers are eligible for PCE, and provide training and technical assistance to utilities in playing their role in the program. The RCA's role is to determine the eligibility of the utilities and then to calculate the PCE levels based on the costs of generation for those utilities. And so basically they have the front end determining of what that level is going to be, and then we write the checks. And the RCA also ensures that the program's being operated in compliance with statutes and regulations. So the funding of the PCE has been a mix over time, and it's changed over time, but the major source of funding at this point is the PCE Endowment Fund. This is an AEA fund that is managed by the Department of Revenue and invested to make a return. It was created in fiscal year 2001 with some funds from the budget reserve and also the proceeds from selling those 4-dam pool projects to the utilities that were using them. It was further capitalized in fiscal years 2007 and 2012, a large infusion into that fund. 7% of the 3-year monthly average value can be appropriated to the PCE program for the cost of the PCE payments. And it is invested to earn that 7% over time. As of the end of August, there was $974 million, and that is projected to be enough to be the only funding source for PCE in this fiscal year and beyond. In some recent years, the endowment fund proceeds have been supplemented by proceeds appropriated from the general fund by the legislature. We anticipate that's not going to be necessary moving forward, that the fund is large enough and is gaining enough value that it can capitalize the entire program. So the way PCE works to reduce power bills is as a credit on the power consumed by utility customers in eligible communities. For residential customers, the credit's on the first 500 kilowatt hours each month. For community facility customers, each community has an allocation of kilowatt hours that's 70 times the community population determined by the Department of Commerce per month for the entire community, and then that's divided up among the different community facility customers. And then the customer's bill is their total cost for their use each month minus that PCE credit. And the utilities, there's a requirement that the utilities notify customers on their bill that that credit is being provided. And this is an important point, and then after that, utilities are reimbursed by AEA's PCE program for that credit that they've already given. And they are required to give that out in advance, and then we reimburse them when they submit monthly reports to our PCE program. So this is kind of what that looks like in general. There's various aspects of charge. This is based on an actual bill, although any identifying information has been removed. The various charges in there add up to the total. This is a bill of 472 kilowatt hours, so that's below the PCE maximum for a residential customer. The total credit for PCE, the subtotal, and so this is what the customer's actually charged. And you can see that in this case it is providing most of that bill is being provided by the PCE program. So this is the effect it has on rates. This is actually fiscal year 2001 data. This is from a report done by the Institute of Social and Economic Research at UAA, ICER, on energy in Alaska. What you see here, the total height of these bars is the overall rate based on the cost of generation or whatever the utility's rate structure is. In each community, each one of these bars is a community. And then the blue portion is the part covered by PCE, and the red portion is the part covered by the consumer. This is what the consumer is actually paying, that effective rate. And you can see there's a lot of variation in these overall rates, and you can see that as a result there's a lot of variation in the PCE credits. But when you get down to these effective rates, there's some that end up still being pretty high. But as you get down to this large chunk of them here, they are all, very many of them are in this generally 20-21 cent range at that time. And that's a result of the formula bringing that down near the average of Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. So this, this very flat curve here shows the success of the program in bringing those effective rates for consumers down to close to what we pay in urban Alaska. So the way this works, just in terms of process, is the utilities submit monthly reports to our PCE program, and that's Jeff Williams and Jess Jennings, who are over here, that run that program. They review those reports and then reimburse the utility for the PCE credit it's given to those eligible customers. And then another function of that is that the data collected through those reports is then entered into a database, and that's used to produce the PCE annual report. It's one of the major sources of information on electric generation and costs in rural Alaska. And so it's very important that that data entered be accurate, both so that the payments are accurate and also so that everyone who uses that data, and that's a lot of people, has accurate information about the current energy picture in those communities. So we've got statistical reports that are put out each year. In the past, we've for many years done one organized by utility in kind of a matrix or spreadsheet format. In fiscal year 2012, we introduced a new format in addition to that for the PCE annual report, and this is a sort of a snapshot by community. And this is just an example. This is from the 2013 report for HUNA, and it shows things like PCE eligible kilowatt hours for that community, population, rates, PCE credit, effective rates, all the major things you might want to know, things also such as line loss and generation efficiency that are particularly important for understanding how a utility is operating. So this is a very useful format for the report, I think. We have it available on our website, AEA website, under the PCE program page. I'd encourage you to take a look. It gives a nice snapshot of each community's participation in the program. So customer eligibility, it is mostly an issue for community facility customers. Residential customers are usually eligible as long as the location is their primary residence. But for community facility customers, it's a little trickier to determine. The criteria for that determination are set by the legislature in the PCE legislation. The statute definition gives some specific examples of what is considered a community facility. So water sewer facility, public outdoor lighting, charitable educational facility, or community building whose operations are not paid for by the state, the federal government, or private commercial interests. And there's a bit of ambiguity in that text, or at least potentially, about what some of these terms mean in practice. And we've actually just done a regulation process to clarify particularly the meaning of this not paid for by the state, federal government portion. And as part of that, we actually have a new form for certification for community facility customers. That's a simplified reporting process for some of those customers that certifies that their funding, even if some of their funding does ultimately come from a state or federal source, that it is their funding. So revenue sharing, some of the BIA funding, there has been some question in the past about whether that counts, and this regulation clarifies that, and we have a simplified form for certifying that. So for communities that have community facilities that may have applied for this in the past and have not gotten it or had some confusion over that, you may want to take a look at our website. The form is up there, and apply for that facility if you think it is eligible. We definitely want to provide the most benefit possible to communities. System-wide, that 70 kilowatt hour per resident amount gives you an overall allocation for community facilities available. The total amount actually being used is about half of that. And part of that could be that some very small communities may just not have enough community facilities to use their entire allocation. But it's also quite likely that there are community facilities out there that are eligible but are not participating in the program for various reasons. And with this new simplified reporting process, we're hoping that we can get those facilities into the system and get that benefit, which can be a very large benefit because these energy costs for some of those larger facilities in a community can be a very large burden on the entity that manages those facilities. And that can have a real noticeable impact on the services available to a community. So another thing we provide as part of our PCE program is training for utility clerks in managing PCE, doing PCE reporting. We do this in collaboration with the RCA because there are reporting requirements for both AEA and the RCA from those clerks. This training is actually managed by the PCE program itself. We also have an AEA training program that does our training at AvTech and manages that. And I oversee that, but we do not do that PCE training. That's actually the PCE program itself. So Jeff would be the one to contact about that. They schedule it when they have demand for it. We'll sometimes do regional trainings if there's a regional organization that wants to partner with them. There was one up in Fairbanks a year and a half ago or so that I attended that was TCC sponsored. So we really want to get as much training as we can out there for utility clerks. We know there's a lot of turnover in many of the communities with these positions. The reporting requirements for PCE are not that onerous, but for someone who's just coming into these positions, they can be intimidating, and we definitely want to work through that and help people get the maximum benefit from the program for their communities. So they're usually in Anchorage, sometimes regional hubs. The PCE program will let you know when the next one. I don't think we have one scheduled just yet for the fall, but we'll have that set up pretty soon. And then we also have our community assistance program that I mentioned briefly before. That's a more general program to assist communities in a variety of different things, including project development, help with grant applications, and making use of AEA's grant programs and grant programs from other agencies and entities, and also loan programs, various other options for projects. But we also help with whatever other energy-related issues communities dealing with, which can often be a barrier to getting any new projects or new infrastructure in place. And PCE issues can be a major component of that. So we assist particularly communities that are not active in the program at all. And Connie will be talking a little bit about some of the examples recently of that. I think we've had some pretty good success working with various other entities, including the U.S. Department of Energy, the Division of Community and Regional Affairs in the State Department of Commerce, and Marsh Creek and Connie Fredenberg here, on getting some of those communities that have been inactive for several years back into the program. We've had some recent successes in that, and are slowly whittling down that number of communities so that we can potentially reach 100% participation, which is our goal. So we help communities. If your communities have any questions about that, probably the PCE program would be the best place to start with questions. But we're also there, available to help. Jeff and Jess do a great job managing that program, but it's just the two of them. It's a very large amount of work, and it has very tight deadlines, and they don't have as much time as they need to meet all the requirements out there, so we help them out as well with that. So you can contact them or us, or we work together. And again, bringing PCE into the policy and outreach team, which community assistance is also in, has been a real advantage in that. And we've actually been working more closely on some of the communities that have not been completely inactive in the program, but have fallen behind on some of the reporting and have been suspended from it. We're trying to get some of those back on, because that can generally be a pretty quick fix. And then just a brief note about the way PCE interacts with some of our other programs. We often get questions about, well, PCE, is this disincentivizing renewable energy or efficiency or other things that communities could be taking advantage of otherwise? And our answer is that no, it shouldn't be a disincentive to those sorts of other projects and other programs, provided everything else is working well with the utility and the community, particularly the rate structure of the utility and how it relates to costs. So the way PCE works is by insulating PCE eligible customers, which is primarily residential and community facility customers, from the overall cost of generation, which is very high in most rural Alaska communities, regardless of what their generation mix is. And therefore, a change in costs, such as from a renewable project that may come in, shouldn't have a huge impact on PCE eligible consumers' effective rates. provided that the utility is adjusting its rates as its costs change. And that's the major issue. If the costs change, rates don't change, that can create some odd results that can look like a disincentive. But it shouldn't be the case. Now, that said, I mean, that means that making those changes to the cost of the utility won't have that much effect on the rates paid by the residential and community facility customers. However, commercial customers who are not eligible for PCE will see the entire benefit of a reduction in costs, and that can be a really major benefit to the community because those commercial customers, the stores and other businesses they might have in a community, can have a really profound effect on the overall cost of living. If you've been to a store in a rural community, you can see the prices of things are very high. One component of that is the energy costs of that business. And reducing those energy costs in whatever way can be one way to reduce those costs and make it a more affordable place to live in rural Alaska. The overall effect of changes in costs will vary depending on what the balance is between the residential, community facility, and commercial customers, as well as state and federal customers, which also are not eligible for PCE, but that does include schools. And a school typically is the largest user of energy in a community. If the school district is able to save money on their utilities through the introduction of new renewable projects or other types of projects, they also see the full benefit of that. That can mean that they don't have to lay off teachers or can provide more instruction. It can also be a major benefit to the community. So this is an estimate we did a couple of years ago, about a year ago or so, looking at several communities that do actually have renewable projects. This is not actual data. This is estimated based on their customer base. We didn't have that actual data available at that point for all these communities. But what this basically shows is the expected benefit to different categories of customers from a decrease in generation costs for a variety of different communities depending on their customer base. So this blue, so we've got Kongiganak, Shaktoolik, Makoriuk, Tuksuk Bay, Quinnahock, Gustavus, Imanik, Sandpoint, Unalakleet, Kotzebue, and Cordova here. And this is a group of communities that has, some have hydro, some have wind, but they all have some renewable generation, much of which is paid for by Renewable Energy Fund through AEA. But they have very different mixes of customer bases. So these blue columns here are the commercial customers, and this is how much of that benefit goes to them. They get that entire benefit because they're not PCE eligible. You can see at the smaller communities, Kong, Shaktoolik, Makoriuk, Tuksuk Bay, they have relatively few commercial customers, don't see as much. They do have a fairly substantial amount that is that state and local government, and that's mostly the schools in these communities seeing that benefit. As you get toward the larger communities, some of the hub communities, Unalakleet, Kotzebue, Cordova, you see a much larger proportion of those benefits going to those commercial customers, and because they have more commercial customers, it's a larger portion of their rate base, and that really can lead to benefits to the community from lower costs, lower prices in those communities. And so then you've got the residential and community facilities are these yellow and red lines. And you can see that in some cases that's a pretty substantial, like in Kongiganak, for example. You can see quite a bit of savings there, and that's again because typically PCE covers 95% of those utility costs above that base rate. And Clair will explain a little bit more about how the rates are calculated. And so that 5% does accrue to all the customers that's not covered by PCE. And so that means in some cases residential customers will get quite a bit of that benefit, in some cases community facilities as well. And then this green bar here is what accrues as savings to the PCE program, lower PCE payments. And that's that other portion of that residential and community facility electric use. So as I mentioned before, we had a recent round of regulation changes to clarify that community facility eligibility language. We're going to have another round opening up to clarify a few more things in our regulations. A little further clarification of community facilities requirement, how often community facilities will have to be recertified, proration of their credits, definitions of some of the other terms in their community building and charitable education facility, timely payment requirement reference, just some clarification of some of the language in there. Another issue is voluntary assignment of PCE benefits. In some cases, communities have asked to have their PCE benefits go to a creditor to repay a loan. In the past, AEA has sometimes done this, but in past couple years, we have not been allowing that as a matter of policy, and this will kind of bring that issue up and kind of come up with a definite answer to that in the regulation of how that should be handled. So that's some of the stuff we got coming up. You know, we'll be open to discussion on some of these things as that goes through that process. For contact information, again, Jeff Williams, who's sitting right back there, is our PCE program manager. You can contact him with questions about the AEA management of the PCE program, and then this is my contact information as well. Like I say, I'm not involved in the day-to-day operation of the program, but we do work closely with Jeff to address community issues, community concerns. So that's all I've got. If you have any questions specific to the AEA portion of that, I can take those now, and then we'll move on to Claire's portion on the RCA.
I did, Jed. When you say that you've got the training over there for learning the part about regulations, is that specific to the village, or can you get the boroughs involved in being or corporations that have invested in villages doing so? Can we send our people in to get training?
That's a good question about whether boroughs or corporations or other entities can do that. Jeff, do you have a policy on that? Who's eligible for those trainings?
We don't have anything set up at the moment for anyone other than utility clerks, but materials and advisement is available for anyone who wants additional information without the program.
And I'm sure you've heard this before, the frustration in the village and the high turnover, the quitting. I mean, sometimes just having someone that they can commiserate with, you know, would help a lot. And we'd like to be able to give some more support if we could even be able to do that, because basically it will we serve.
Thanks, David. That's helpful. Any other questions? Thank you. Marsh?
Going back to the definition of being funded by the government, does it matter if it was built by a grant for the government or the ongoing maintenance?
The issue is the ongoing maintenance costs. You know, most public facilities in rural communities were built with some amount of government funding, and that's not really the issue with this criterion for eligibility. It's who's paying those electric bills really on an ongoing basis. Anything else? All right, thanks.
Okay. Aha. Hello, my name is Clair Knutsen-Lata. I'm with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. I've been working there for about 5 years now. Specifically, I work with regulated electric utilities. I have a coworker here, Brenda Cox, who works with the unregulated utilities and who does an excellent job with it. I'm going to do a quick recap because unfortunately I didn't coordinate my presentation with Jed here. So we're going to go over a little bit of the same information, but only a couple slides, and then we're going to talk about how the PCE rate is calculated, and I promise I'll slow down my talking as I get slightly less nervous. Promise, I promise. And a little bit about how the RCA works with the PCE program. So, as we discussed earlier, the PCE program was established in 1984, 1985, thereabouts, a component of a statewide energy plan with the goal of sort of equalizing high electric costs in rural Alaska with the lower costs in urban Alaska. We appropriate state funds each year. Last fiscal year, we work on a fiscal year system. Last fiscal year, it was estimated at approximately $40.4 million. This year, it was approximately $40.3 million. How the program works for the end user is that on their bill, as Jed pointed out, is there's a PCE credit. And so that's, I think, what most people in rural Alaska are familiar with about the PCE program is they'll just see the credit on their electric bill. PCE funds are then reimbursed by AEA as appropriate. 2 state agencies are involved in this, AEA, which you just learned about, and the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. We actually don't work in the same building, which can be a little amusing from time to time, but they have lovely facilities, and so we go over there to meet. Oh, bugger. So how does the RCA help? Or how are we involved in the program? And why? We're required by the legislature to be. That's the answer there. There's a regulation and a statute that requires the RCA's participation in this. The statute is AS 42, 45, 100 through 190, and the regulation is 3 AAC 52, 600 through 690. And what we're required to do is calculate the base rate for PCE, calculate PCE levels for each participating utility, and determine utility eligibility. So, of those 3 terms, base rate is sometimes the most confusing because we talk about 2 different base rates. We talk about the base rate for electricity and the base rate for PCE. The base rate, excuse me, the base rate for electricity is sort of, that's the energy charge on your electric bill. For PCE, the base rate is the weighted average residential electric rate for consumers in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. So we look at those 3 cities, we look at how much electricity they sold, what their rates were, and we put it through a formula and we come up with a number. It's calculated each year and effective on July 1. Currently the rate is 14.82 cents per kilowatt hour, and if you want to look at the regulations for this, the regulation is 3 AAC 52.610. The calculation of the base rate is probably the busiest time of the year for the Regulatory Commission because we do 2 different things at once. We calculate the PCE base rate and then we also calculate the regulatory cost charge. So if you're trying to call us on June 30th and you get voicemail, I apologize profusely, but we're probably up to our elbows in envelope stuffing and similar. So first we're going to talk a little bit about how the PCE program works from the RCA's perspective for non-regulated utilities. This is, as I mentioned before, Brenda's specialty. So we approach it, so to determine the PCE levels, we look at submitted reports and we review the information. The reports that we receive are the annual reports, which are filed sort of depending on the utility at the end of a year, and the year is set by each utility rather than a general year. All right. The fuel reports are the other report we get, and those are much more frequent. The fuel reports have fuel costs, which involves cost of fuel, delivery charges, and purchase power. When we review our information, and by we I mean Fair Brenda sitting here, when review is undertaken, we look at what costs are necessary and reasonable and can be verified, and that's the most important part, is we need to be able to verify that information. So when we receive these reports, it often comes with quite a few invoices attached, and that gives us the opportunity to say, okay, so they're reporting here that they bought 1,000 gallons at $4.15 a gallon, and here we've got the invoice from Crowley or whomever saying 1,000 gallons, $4.15 a gallon, check. We want to make sure that those are necessary and reasonable, and we eliminate any duplicative and unnecessary costs. And then when we're doing the calculation, the utilities profit is not included when determining PCE. Efficiency and line loss are two things that really affect the PCE calculation. When we look at efficiency, we're talking about the kilowatt hours generated divided by gallons consumed. So gallons, usually gallons of diesel. The minimum standard is based on the utility size and kilowatt hour generation amount. The range for this is about 8.5 kilowatt hours to 13.5 kilowatt hours. And if the standard is not met, then we do something called imputation. And what imputation is doing is it's taking the kilowatt hours generated and the gallons consumed and changing the gallons consumed until it comes up to a number that would have been efficient. So say your efficiency is 11.5%, but you're only coming in at, not 11.5%, 11.5 kilowatt hours per gallon, and you're coming in at, you're only generating, say, 10 kilowatt hours a gallon. We would look and make sure and see, we'd look at the gallons that you're consuming and change that when we calculate your PCE to come up with a number that would have resulted in the 11.5 kilowatt hours. Line loss is calculated as kilowatt hours generated minus kilowatt hours sold divided by kilowatt hours generated. The minimum standard is 12%, and that's across the board. It doesn't matter the size of the utility. If the standard's not met, then we impute, and we impute this by increasing the reported kilowatt hours sold. So again, you've got the formula. You want to change the elements of the formula until you get to that 12%. Something to note here really quick is occasionally we see what gets referred to as negative line loss or line gain. And what this is usually caused by is there'll be instead of syncing up when the meters are read, you'll have some meters read before the reporting period and some meters read after the reporting period. So if we see that on your reports, we'll usually give you a call and check on that. We have had a couple instances where there's mysterious line gain, and we don't know what happened there, but generally it's the meter reading that's at fault. So when we've got all this information, we've looked at your line loss, we've looked at your efficiency, the question is what is your PCE level? How much PCE should you receive? The eligible PCE level is based on the lesser of the utility costs and the utilities cost, the utilities rate per kilowatt hour, or the maximum PCE level. And the maximum PCE level changes every year with the PCE base rate. So you start with $1, you subtract the base rate, and then you take 95% of that. So an example, this is cost-based, is you've got the non-fuel cost, which is about $112,000. The fuel cost $112,000, non-fuel cost $75,000. That comes out to approximately $187,000. So, and say they sold 300,000 kilowatt hours, that's 62.5 cents per kilowatt hour, minus the PCE base rate, which I apologize, I forgot to change there. Gets you to, and then 95% of that will get you to your PCE level. So in this case, it would be 45.79 cents per kilowatt hour. My job involves quite a lot of math. So I apologize if this ends up looking a bit like an algebra class. Bear with me though, I promise. So we've calculated your PCE, you filed your report, we've looked at it, we reviewed it, we've calculated your PCE level. And then we send you a letter order, which is an official action by the commission informing you of the new PCE level. The PCE levels might change each time a utility files the annual report, a fuel report, a rate change, so if your electricity rates change, and then when we have the base rate change, everybody's changes that day. Other correspondence is a suspension recommendation. We don't like to send these. We would prefer to keep everybody on the PCE program. AEA would prefer to keep people on the PCE program. We want to make sure that everybody is getting help with their electric rates. However, we have standards that we have to meet in terms of filing deadlines, information that we receive, and if a utility doesn't file, That's our biggest problem is we don't receive reports, then we have to suspend you from the program. This has been getting better over the years, and so hopefully soon we will have 100% reporting all the time, perfect, and we won't have to worry about suspension anymore. We also send out a letter, not a letter order, just a letter when the report is due. So, economically regulated utilities. This is my bread and butter. Just a quick, these are the utilities that are currently economically regulated, if you were curious if you were or weren't. We have 14 utilities serving 47 communities. APC is our largest. It serves 26 communities, and then MKEC, which is Middle Kuskokwim, and IPEC, which is Inside Passage, both serve 5 communities. It's actually a lot of fun. Middle Kuskokwim is one of the ones that I work with most frequently, and they're a lot of fun just for various reasons. They're delightful people. Anyway. So how do we, so when we look at the regulated utilities, how do we determine the PCE levels for them? We're looking at different types of reports. So if you were to go online to our website, the Regulatory Commission's website, which is rca.alaska.gov, if you're curious, if you were to go online and look for PCE reports, all you would find is unregulated reports. There is no standardized form for submitting a report for a regulated utility. The reason for this is that regulated utilities can only change rates through what's called a tariff filing, and a tariff filing has to meet specific requirements. 3 AAC 48270 is the regulation, and it lists a whole bunch of things, like you have to say how many customers this will affect, and what your annual revenues would be, and the change in the revenues and all this kind of stuff. So we don't have a specific form that you can just fill out. Instead we get a letter. And then they'll include what are called tariff sheets. Tariff sheets list the tariffed rates. And these are the bulk of the filings we receive. So we'll call them, usually we call them cost of power adjustment reports or cost of power adjustment filings. COPA is the short form of that. We get those almost exclusively quarterly at this point. We have a few that are still filing under the old system, which is the FCRA, the fuel cost rate adjustment. I think we're down to 2 utilities that are filing under that system. Excuse me. The other file that we receive is the annual operations report, but that doesn't affect PCE levels. We review the submitted information much the same way as the non-regulated does. We look at invoices. We want to check, make sure that the fuel that you're consuming, the fuel that you're reporting is purchased, matches the invoice. We almost never have a problem with this. We do occasionally, one of the big things we'll watch for is transposed numbers. And I do this, I work on spreadsheets all day, and 1, 2, 2, 1. So we go through, check, make sure that's A-okay. And we also want to make sure that all the calculations are accurate. A lot of this is done through Excel, so we want to make sure that all of your Excel formulas are right and nothing's hard-coded, so it all works. So this is sort of the long form for calculating PCE for a regulated utility. And this is regulated utility X. We'll call them Spenard Public Authority. So we're looking at a couple of different numbers here. First is your non-fuel costs and your fuel costs. I do. So non-fuel costs is here, it's 0.2984, and it matches up there. There's fuel power costs, and those are down here. So here's where your current fuel price is, here's how many gallons you're consuming. Then you multiply these two, you get the cost, estimated sales, and then a balancing count balance is something that's part of the COPA. So that's why we get these two together, is you get a COPA filing and a PCE filing all at once, because we need that number to calculate your PCE. So those two numbers come in up here, we get a total power cost, and then we do the same thing like we did for the non-regulated utility, where we subtract out the base rate and then multiply by 95%. So we get to this is your cost base, and then there's the statutory maximum, what's the lesser, then we look at the customer class rate, and the customer class rate is composed of the energy rate, the COPA, the RCC, and the customer charge minus the PCE base. And then we look at what's the lesser of these three numbers. And in this case, it was the costs. So it's 50.71 cents per kilowatt hour. More math. So just like with the non-regulated utilities, the regulated utilities are required to fall under certain efficiency and line loss standards. Same regulations. It's the 8.5 to 13.5 kilowatt hours per gallon and 12% line loss. And again, if we have to, we impute the COPA to come up with a PCE calculation so that we're changing those the fuel consumed or the kilowatt hours sold to get to what it should have been if you had met your efficiency and line loss. For those of you that work with regulated utilities, something that's very, very important to note is that when you come up with that imputed COPA amount, it's only for calculating the PCE. It's not the COPA you charge your customers. So it's not your fuel surcharge. It's just for the calculation of the PCE. The filing requirements for regulated utilities are found at 52504 and 52640. Do we have any of you work with regulated utilities? So you guys may have noticed lately that you've been getting filings rejected for failure to meet form and filing requirements. I apologize, but if you haven't, then good job. But we've noticed lately that there's been a lot of sort of skipping bits and pieces of this. And so I just want to encourage everybody, before you submit your filing, to make sure that it meets not only the 42,570, but also the 52,540, sorry, 48,570, but also the 52,504 and 52,640 requirements. If you have any questions about those, my name and number is on the RCA's website, and I'd be happy to walk you through them. Correspondence that the RCA has with regulated utilities, letter orders just like with the non-regulated utilities, and if a tariff becomes part of a docket, and a docket is a formal proceeding before the commission, then we don't send a letter order out because that's all the official action of the commission is being taken through the formal proceeding. Instead, we send what's called a pursuant to letter, and it'll say at the top, pursuant to docket number U1215, the commission has taken this action. We also send out letter orders on or near July 1st when we update your PCE base rate. When we calculate it, we look at, we contact all the regulated utilities. We prepared new tariff sheets with the new RCC and PCE. The RCC is the regulatory cost charge. So that's a charge that's paid by regulated utilities, but not by unregulated utilities. So we've got the new RCC and PCE base rates, and then we prepare tariff sheets for everybody. We're preparing approximately 150 tariff sheets all told, and right now there's 3 of us. So it's a very, very busy day. And we mail those out, get them out. We used to handle those through individual tariff filings. Now we do it all through a docket. It's a much smoother process and takes a lot less of our time. So if you've noticed a difference, for those of you who work with regulated utilities, if you've noticed a difference in how your PCE and RCC tariff sheets come to you, that's because we've changed a little bit how we do it. And that's actually brings me to the end. And I think I spoke rather quickly, so I think we've gone through a 20-minute presentation in about 15 or 10 minutes, and so I apologize. Oh, now the clicker doesn't work. There it goes. So, I've powered through, and I see some dazed faces, and I apologize again. Is there anybody who has questions that I can answer? Yes, sir.
I've just kind of got like a future forward-looking question.
Mm-hmm.
Saying that the fund for PCE is like reaching maturity and it'll pay for itself. Is there any like future thought into calculating that into the PCE? You know, if there's excess money that the fund is generating to be able to increase the amount of PCE funding and thereby lowering residential rates even more?
There's been some thought of what what will be done once we start to get excess money in the fund, but no decisions made as of this point as far as I know.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, why is it that some utilities have a lower after PCE rate than others? What would cause that?
I missed part of your question. I'm sorry.
See, I work for IPAD.
Mm-hmm.
You must be talking about Roxanne.
Yeah. You're also delightful people, by the way.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd say that.
You're lovely. You do lovely filings. I appreciate them.
What I wanted to know is, I noticed that, you know, we get the PCE report annually, and I noticed that not everybody has the same after PCE rate. And I guess if I think about it, I can probably figure it out, but I'm wondering if you know right off the bat. Like ours will typically be around 22 cents per kilowatt hour after the PCE credit is netted out of our total rate.
So,
But I noticed some people have like 30 cents or 35 cents after PCE, and I'm just wondering what causes that.
So without having anything in front of me,
What sorts of things could cause that?
Right. Things that could cause that would include failure to meet efficiency or line loss, because that'll cause the imputation that then means that you're getting a slightly different amount of PCE than you would if you had met those standards. One of the big problems is we're starting to get a couple of utilities that are reaching the maximum. So off the top of my head, the one that I would call to mind is Lime Village, which is actually now deregulated. But at one point, Lime Village had a pre-PCE rate. I remember there was one filing I received where the COPA amount, just the fuel surcharge, was $3.25. Yeah. So that was a combination of factors going into that. They're fairly remote. They have to fly in fuel at about 500 gallons at a time. And they also had not filed in about 5 years. So part of the COPA is the balancing account. So that looks at how much money they're recovering for fuel costs versus how much money they're spending on fuel costs, and tries to balance those two out so that you're not in the long term over recovering or under recovering. So they hadn't filed in a while. So there was a fairly large balancing account, and so that had come up with a very, very high number that was a little alarming. So I think that's going to be a factor, is if a utility has reached the maximum and then continued to increase in costs. We can't increase the PCE because we're limited by regulation and statute. Other reasons is if it could be, I think actually those are the only two I can think of, is imputation and the maximum.
For unregulated utilities, another factor would be if the utility's rate is significantly higher than their costs as determined by the RCA in setting the PCE level. Since what unregulated means is that they're not rate regulated by the RCA, which means they can set their rates on their own without review. However, when the RCA does review their PCE filings, they're using the same standards that they would use for rate regulated utilities. If their rates are in fact a lot higher than that, then that additional amount is not covered by PCE, and that's one of the major factors.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I saw another hand come up. Yes, sir.
So I was just curious on your spreadsheet example. I guess it just has to me, and I know I've talked to Jed and others about this, that
one?
Yep, exactly. If you, say, put in a wind project and you cut your gallons, your estimated fuel consumption down in half or something, or put 75% of that would drop your PCE level, even though you have a really efficient kilowatt hours per gallons, right? In a nutshell, am I missing something, that you put it in a wind turbine, your gallons of consumed goes down, you still have a really high efficiency kilowatt hours per gallons, and therefore your PCE drops.
Right.
I know there's all different qualifications on the rate class and that, but in general, am I following that correctly, or what am I missing?
If I understand what you're saying, I think you're following correctly.
Yeah, I guess the thing that comes up with this question, this is one of those questions we get a lot. is that if your fuel costs are dropping a lot, that means your overall costs are dropping a lot. And that means that your rates, if you don't change them, are going to end up in that position that I was just mentioning in response to Jody's question, where that excess that is no longer a cost but still included in your rate is then not included in your PCE level. And that's where you get that kind of effect. So if a utility's costs are being dropped a lot by a renewable project or something else, they should adjust their rates accordingly. For regulated utilities, since the RCA has oversight of their rates, that's not so much an issue, but with the unregulated utilities, it can be an issue, and there have been examples of that happening. Another thing on the efficiency side, particularly, that's actually just divided by the diesel generated kilowatt hours. It's not the overall generation, so any of the renewable generation isn't included in that calculation. But that issue of the overall costs is still potentially an issue.
And so if you do that and you're a regulated utility, the way that you would change your rates, and so you look up here and you'll see allowable non-fuel costs. And so that's the number that would, and then the 12-month total kilowatt hour sales, those would change in what's called a rate case.
Right,
and
but
so
your non-fuel costs are your costs of delivery, of servicing the
plants
system.
And
sure, but most of that's kind of fixed costs of salaries, maintaining the lines, keeping the system up to date. It's not necessarily, if you put in a wind farm, going to change your allowable non-fuel costs.
So I don't actually work with rate cases, but if you'd like, I'm in this room over here, and I can get you a business card and get you in touch with somebody who does work with rate cases and is much more familiar with the development of the rate design.
Okay, and just one note on that is that any O&M costs involved with your new project would be included in that non-fuel costs, and so that might mean that you would in fact need a rate case because you'd have different non-fuel costs.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just recently, in talking to Mira Kohler, she was talking to me about a situation where I think it's INN, where they're selling some of their capacity they're producing heat with it, and that has had a detrimental impact on the amount of PCE they're receiving. Why is that, and is that going to continue? Because we have, at IPEC, we have 2 waste heat programs, one in Nangoon and one in Hoona. And I have noticed now, since both of those are operating, that our PCE rate is lower. And that could be also because fuel costs have stabilized somewhat. But my suspicion is it's beyond that. Can you explain that? And is that going to be an ongoing problem? Because that kind of discourages utilities from waste heat recapture.
I understand that, and I've got in front of me a letter that Mira Kohler had sent to the commission. This is something that we're discussing right now in the agency and trying to find a good answer to. What it's going to probably involve is some regulation changes, and that we're a government agency, so it takes a little bit of time, and so I apologize. I don't have a firm answer for you on why that's happening, mostly because it's not something that I work with directly, since I do mostly regulated utilities, and INN and stuff are non-regulated, though you're talking about waste heat regulation, waste heat in IPEC. So I've got an IPEC filing sitting on my desk right now. So if you want to give me a call, I'll be back in the office tomorrow, and I can look at where you're talking about in your filing. But other than that, the best I can say is that we've got the letters. We're talking to Mira, and we're looking at the situation and looking for a solution, and hopefully as fast as we can. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm just glad to know that you guys are working on it.
Yeah.
I think that's probably an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
If you want your, I learned yesterday, that only about 30% of the energy from the piece of generation is actually resulting from electricity. So if you factor
Mm-hmm.
So you're being more efficient. But
Yeah.
you're kind of discouraged from that if your people are suffering by having a lower PCE credit.
Right.
So that kind of, defeats the
Yeah.
purpose a little bit. And I don't think that's probably the intention.
I don't think it was the intention either, but it is, like I said, it's something we're working on. Actually, our former chairman has been working with a couple of us directly trying to find a solution to that. So it's on our radar.
Thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
Roxanne speaks very well.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's like you guys are all over family.
Yeah. It's a small community. Yes, ma'am.
Is being RUBA certified a requirement to PCE regulatory utilities?
No. RUBA, Rural Utility Business Advisor, is a program that the Division of Community and Regional Affairs has that's related to water and sewer utilities. It doesn't affect the electric utilities directly.
Anybody else? 1, 2, 3. Oh, yes, sir.
I think I spoke up on this before. I don't know if it's back in '07 when I last attended this thing. Anyways, what is the smallest or the least, residential customers you have in any other small community like mine? Because I was just asking that because I think it relates to rate changes. Because I entered into there back into Birch Creek back in '89, and they stood at like 60 cents, just flat rate. So when I did the PCE training down in Anchorage at the end of March of '91, there may be been some changes and calculations, or I don't know, but I like to get more training in this thing. Because three days of training, like say in PCE, it's a real intense, fast pace.
Mm-hmm.
You get over this thing and it covers a lot of that stuff there. But I just want to find out to see if there's any community that's the size of Birch Creek, or how do you? I mean, because I feel like sometimes we're just kind of like off the radar, and I'm dealing with such a large subject of this kind for such a small community.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting here with some communities that have 600-700 people, and maybe they average around that, but I'm looking at about up to maybe 13 homes.
Yeah. The smallest community that I've worked with is Lime Village, and that was 23 individuals. And it was, I want to say nine connections. And the manager for that utility was Ernie Baumgartner. I don't know if he is managing their utility any longer. No. There is training offered there's the PCE training, then there's some training down at Avtech.
Yeah, well, the training at Avtech is for operators.
Okay.
But we do have the PCE training, and I talked to you a bit about this yesterday at the other session. But we can definitely work with you on what you need.
Yeah, we covered a lot of that PCE stuff over there, but nothing like this. I had another question, and that I think you know these 861 forms, EIA to the federal government these annual reports due like April 30th. There's an annual report goes to this RCA, and
yes.
all of a sudden you're approached with this thing sometime in January to do an annual report to the federal DOI in their Department of Energy somewhere, and they've got this letter coming to the tribal council with like say are a little unregulated. With violations for not doing that on time, and I didn't have no information whatsoever about the power being bought by both commercial, residential, or even a community. So I just kind of zeroed out a couple of those things, just send it on its way and let them deal with it. Otherwise, I'm just kind of non-existent with that part of the reporting issues. So I just thought, what can we do to fill in there other than power cost equalization requirements? It just kind of seems like, because the federal government is threatening with fines and all this stuff. So I was just kind of speechless there.
Yeah, we don't actually, I don't know that we really do much with the Federal Department of Energy, which of course is a completely unhelpful answer for you, so I'm sorry. But if you're concerned about filing on time for your annual report to the Regulatory Commission, and Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, you can send in a letter and just say, ask for an extension. So, hey, we don't have all the information together at the moment. We will have it together by May 30th or May 31st, or, give yourself some time that you'll be able to get the information together. Is that, yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank all of the people that I've spoke with this far. There's about half a dozen of them. I was formerly working with somebody that's got these software, and I think we're going to be working toward that so we can just run this thing and more smoothly, so everybody will be happy in this whole thing.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Jed will be all working together to make sure this thing is more compiled and get into some compliance with this whole thing.
Yeah. He's an awesome guy to work with.
Thank you.
Right on, thank you.
Yeah, we'll work with you. I'm not very familiar with that EIA federal reporting and what the requirements are for that, but we can certainly work with you on whatever the issues are.
Yeah, it's something else, because I haven't really heard about that until 2-3 years in 861 forms EIA. I don't have a
I don't know. Sounds like
above
my pay grade.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome, sir. And it looks like we're running close to time, so I will pass the podium off to the next speaker.
Oh, she's going to speak. Sorry.
Let's give Clair a round of applause.
Jim Hollinsworth, are you here? Jim from Arctic Village was supposed to do this, and something happened. He's not here. So at last minute, I offered to fill in for him. And I guess what I'm going to talk about is what happened to Arctic Village and Venetai. Why were they not on PCE that we helped them get back on? For one thing, Arctic Village didn't have a certificate to operate as a utility, so they couldn't get PCE. I guess years ago, maybe that wasn't a requirement. They were on PCE at one time, and then failed to keep up on reports. It's kind of an onerous system. You have a monthly report, an annual report, a fuel report that's due varying amounts of time depending on how many times you get fuel in a year. And if you fall behind, if you lose your clerk for whatever reason and you get behind, the next person that comes in, if they don't have the means to figure out, how to get those past reports caught up, it just snowballs, and then you're off. And then getting back on just seems overwhelming, so people will go for years without getting PCE. So through the START program, that Office of Indian Energy Strategic Technical Assistance Response Team, we were able to go out to Arctic Village and Venetai and got them both, got Arctic Village certificated, and then did a test case year report where we calculated how much we thought they would based on actual numbers, projected out over a year what they would have generated, how much it would have cost them for non-fuel costs as well as fuel, and how much kilowatt hours they would have sold. So we figured out all of this, and they were given a rate by the RCA, and then they were on PCE. And then we also installed prepay meters in both villages so that collections were not a problem. when you talk about why would a rate ever be too high, why would it not all be covered by PCE? Sometimes you have to set the rate really high when you've had low collections for years, and you need to, and maybe you owe on a fuel loan from 2 years ago. So now you have to set your rate really high, but your costs don't count up as much, you know, to keep your PCE up, because that past due fuel loan doesn't count on your PCE expenses this year. So they had a lower, like right now the rates are $1 a kilowatt hour out there, and their PCE is only 53.5 cents. So they're still paying, you know, 46.5 cents for power out there, and the state takes half their PCE for a past due fuel loan. So it's, when you talk about saving money for doing repairs, how do you do that under those circumstances? They're trying real hard now to do better, but it's very hard. And you know, once you put those prepay meters in, people don't use that much electricity, so you're not bringing in a lot of revenue. Anyway, let's see. Oh, and an individual can be kicked off PCE too. If an individual gets too far behind on their payments, Jeff will kick them off. But what we discovered though with the prepay meters was we could get those people back on PCE right away. We just helped another village that had a whole bunch of customers that had been kicked off PCE because they were so far behind in their payments. We put them on a prepay meter and set a percentage of every time they pay money, say put it down $100, 20% of it goes towards the past due and the rest goes towards usable power now, then that person can get back on PCE. So that really helps utilities. Oh, the community facility issue. Why would you know, sometimes when you get a new water wastewater system and you're a small community, the usage of that one community facility can put you over the top. And now, you know, you've used up all your community facility credits because you only get 70 kilowatt hours times the population every month. So if you have one big user community facility, the others, somebody's going to lose out in getting the PCE. Problems with the PCE formula that I see, and I work with some of the smallest individual utilities, so our problems are different than the bigger ones. But grant-funded infrastructure, you're expected to take care of it. You can't depreciate it. So saving to repair and maintain that is a big burden on your ratepayers, because you're going to add more costs to their rate, more cents to their rate, but PCE won't offset it because you're just saving that money. You're not spending it. It doesn't count till you spend it. So it's really hard to save for repairs when it doesn't count as an expense until you spend it. And then we were talking about the INN issue with heat, the sales of heat, and how and how IPEC is facing that issue. Well, there's another way that it worked out. I work for a utility in Kokonak that got wind turbines, and they have a lot of additional equipment at the power plant that adds to the station service. They didn't meter, their hot water dump load wasn't metered separately. It just counts as station service. So their station service burden went up considerably. Well, that looks like line loss. You know, that station service isn't backed out when they calculate line loss, and so it makes their line loss go really high, so they get docked on their PCE because of that additional equipment that's really beneficial. It's helping to heat the school, but yet the community loses out on PCE because of it, just because of the way it was metered and the way that the formula works. Let's see. Oh, how could we improve PCE? I think that that depreciation thing, I know people a lot smarter than me, economists, one economist did say he thought that grant funded infrastructure should be allowed to be depreciated. If the state's going to go around putting in big expensive power plants and renewable projects, but not allow them to be depreciated so that the community can save towards repairing and replacing those, it's almost like we're shooting ourselves in the foot, you know, for not allowing some sort of a mechanism for saving. And I maybe that's not the way to do it, but something has to change so that you could save towards that. And I don't know if maybe if you do start an R&R account, could that be counted as an expense each year, however much you put into it, so that it could keep the PCE formula up for ratepayers while the utility collects enough to save? That's one idea. Yeah, I think that's about it. And I just also wanted to say thank you to the folks that help with PCE at the RCA. Brenda, we work with you a lot, and Jeff. Jeff should get some kind of an award. That guy has an amazing amount of work to do, I think. And and the community facility thing. We had a real issue this year when as Jed touched on a little bit, there was a controversy over federal funding. Tribal utilities get all their money, tribes get all their money from the BIA. That's where their operating money comes from. Now, yeah, that's federal funding until it gets to them. Then it's local funding. It's like municipal revenue sharing or something. And there was a little, misunderstanding, and there for a while the Energy Authority wasn't approving community facilities that were tribally owned because they were federally funded. And poor Arctic Village, I just got them certificated, got them on PCE, got them all excited, and then they didn't get any PCE on their clinic, their water plant, the washateria, their tribal office, so they didn't get any PCE. And that all got straightened out, but it was at the end of the fiscal year. So, they're still waiting to see if they're going to get any money back from that money that they should have been getting all along, we thought. And I guess I meant to end on a positive note. There, I did it. Sorry about that, but I think that's about it.
Okay, thanks, Connie. Does anyone have any questions for Connie?
Connie, you mentioned the waste heat for the winter caveat.
Yes.
How do you overcome that? And do you have any recommendations for future projects? We have several right now. Wind and we're taking that. It's going to be metered separately. So how do we ensure that happens in the building process?
Well, INN and AVEC and IPEC are all working on that. There is no solution yet. Metering it separately, that's a good idea, I think, because the one in Kokonak, we have to go back in now and meter that separately in order to even know, but it still won't help. It sounds like it's still a problem, even if you do know how much went to heat.
So is it billed separately now? So that you know exactly what that waste heat component is?
Right. What they do, I think, ask Terry how they deal with it. I think they take the revenue right off the top, right?
The way that they dealt with our most recent annual filing is we asked them to reduce our sales by the interruptible kilowatt hours that we sold because we sell them at a very low rate. And they said, okay, we'll do that, but in return, we're going to reduce all of your costs by every penny that you generated in revenue for the sales of that interruptible power. So it's like standing on the bowl of Jell-O, as far as it's an unpredictable. We sell it for a low rate. So there is. I did talk with Patch at the Regulatory Commission, and he does want to put together a working group to address this issue, because there does need to be, in my opinion, a stable formula. Even if it's not perfect to start with, at least everybody is getting treated the same way every time until we iron it out and figure out how to deal with it, because it does serve as a discouragement for the utilities, for the consumers, for economic development, the ratepayers as a whole. So there's lots of room for improvement with the PCE program, but I think that venues like this and dedication of the utilities and the agencies, that we can come up with a good solution. So.
And it's like taking one benefit away from something and giving it to another.
I mean, they're getting cheaper heat, but the whole community is paying for it.
Right.
That's how it's working. And so I'm glad you guys understand the problem, because at first I thought, what? No, wait, that can't be. And now I understand it, and so I'm glad that a solution is being identified. And thank you guys. I know you guys work really hard. Roxanne talks about Jeff. I'm happy to meet you. I really am, because she talks about how, she says, I don't know how he does it. He must live there.
All right.
You know, one person did. I almost forgot this. Jed showed that slide with all the benefits that go back to the PCE program from Renewable Energy Fund projects, and one suggestion was, well, how about you put that money into an R&R account for the utility instead of giving it back to the state, but keep it out there where it's gonna. We need to maintain this infrastructure, and there's got to be some money for it, and that would be a good way to put some money in it.
There was mention about how, the BIA funding was viewed. Has there been an official determination on the tribally owned health clinics and whether they qualify as community facilities?
Yes, the outcome of that process was that we clarified that federal funding that comes in and is totally discretionary on the part of the tribe is not considered state or federal funding for the purpose of PCE eligibility, and that's how state revenue sharing had already been treated. That was the clarification, and on the new form, there's just a certification that the facility owner can say, yes, this is discretionary funding. It's not directly federally controlled, and that determines eligibility. All right, well, thanks, everyone. I'm glad to see some nice turnout for what is sometimes considered a sort of a dry subject. PCE is a very important program for rural Alaska, I think, and I hope this has helped you understand it a little more. So thanks, everyone, and we'll all be available for further questions if you have them. Thanks.